Everyone froze when Lily wrapped her arms around me in front of the judge. The room was already heavy with silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but instead presses down on your shoulders like a weight you cannot lift. The walls were high and pale, the wood polished to the kind of shine that almost mocked us with its perfection, while every face in the room seemed sharpened with judgment. Lawyers shuffled papers with careful hands. The bailiff stood like a statue near the door, and the judge peered down from the bench with a look that combined both impatience and curiosity. To my left, Adam sat stiff, his knuckles white from gripping the table, while across the aisle Maya leaned back with a confidence that wasn't earned but performed. She smiled faintly, like she had already won, like this was just the formality of watching her victory written into law. And then, in the middle of all that brittle tension, Lily moved. She was small, too small to carry the kind of courage that suddenly lit up her face, and yet her steps were sure, steady, deliberate. Her little shoes tapped against the floor with a rhythm that seemed louder than any gavel. Everyone's eyes followed her, but mine couldn't look anywhere else. My breath caught as she turned away from her father and walked straight toward me. I remember my heart pounding so violently it felt like it might bruise my ribs. And I remember the whisper of papers going still as even the lawyers stopped pretending to read. She reached me in 3 quick steps, and before I could say anything, before I could even think of the consequences, her arms locked around my waist. It wasn't a hesitant hug, not the shy gesture of a child seeking comfort. It was fierce, unshakable, the kind of embrace that belongs to someone who has already made up her mind. I froze, my arms instinctively hovering in the air, terrified that if I moved, I might shatter the fragile moment and cause her pain. The entire courtroom tilted, suspended between disbelief and shock. And then came the words. Soft enough that they could have been mistaken for a secret, but clear enough that no one missed them. "You can marry my dad if you want." The sentence didn't land like a child's innocent remark. It struck like a revelation, a confession, a plea wrapped in the disguise of permission. The judge blinked, as if unsure he had heard correctly. Adam's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with an emotion I couldn't read. Part astonishment, part fear, part something deeper that neither of us dared name. And Maya's face twisted. It wasn't the slow crumble of heartbreak, but the quick flash of rage she couldn't quite disguise. For the first time since I had known her, her mask slipped, and beneath the practiced charm was the raw, unfiltered fury of a woman losing control. My own body betrayed me. My chest ached, my throat burned, and I felt heat crawl up my face as if every secret, every unspoken doubt I carried was suddenly exposed under the sterile light of the courtroom. My mind raced through 100 impossible questions. Why would she say this here? What had she seen? What had she understood? What had she felt that led her to make such a declaration in the very place where her life was being decided? I wanted to tell her not to pull her away, to protect her from the mess that adults had created. But my voice abandoned me, trapped beneath the swell of emotion that clogged my chest. The silence stretched, unbearable, until it became clear that everyone was waiting for me to move, to speak, to react. The lawyers leaned forward, eager to weaponize the moment. The judge adjusted his glasses, curiosity sharpening into scrutiny. Adam whispered my name like a prayer, and Maya's nails dug into the table so deeply that I half expected to see blood. And all I could do was stand there, frozen, holding my breath as Lily's arms tightened, her cheek pressed against me with a trust I hadn't asked for, but now carried like a burden. In that second, the world didn't care who I was before this moment. I wasn't just Adam's girlfriend. I wasn't just a woman who stumbled into someone else's custody battle. I was the person a child had chosen in front of everyone who mattered, in front of the very system that claimed to know what was best for her. It should have been a sweet moment, the kind of memory people tell years later at weddings or family gatherings. But this wasn't a wedding hall, and this wasn't a home. This was a courtroom, where sweetness turned sour the instant it threatened someone's case. I could feel the weight of what Lily had done pressing against me, not because I didn't want her affection, but because I knew exactly how Maya would twist it, how the lawyers would dissect it, how the judge would analyze it. This wasn't just a hug anymore. It was evidence. The murmur started small, a ripple of whispers threading through the gallery, growing louder with each passing heartbeat. Someone coughed. A pen tapped nervously against a notepad. The bailiff shifted, clearly uncertain whether he should intervene. And then the judge lifted a hand, silencing the room with a single gesture. His eyes settled on me. Not Adam, not Maya, not even Lily, but me, as though I held the answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my mind scrambling for something that wouldn't shatter everything. But Lily didn't let go. She held tighter, her little fingers gripping the fabric of my blouse as if she knew I might try to pull away, as if she understood the weight of what she had done. Her words still echoed in my ears, haunting and beautiful. "You can marry my dad if you want." And that was when it hit me. Not just the sound of those words, but the force behind them. She wasn't just giving permission. She was begging for stability, for permanence, for something she could believe wouldn't vanish, like everything else in her young life. She was telling the truth, the only way she knew how, not in legal terms, not in affidavits, not in carefully worded statements, but in the raw, unpolished honesty of a child who wanted to feel safe. My heart broke and healed at the same time. Because even though she was too young to understand the gravity of marriage, she understood what it symbolized. Staying, belonging, choosing to be there no matter what storms came. And in that moment, I realized that this courtroom wasn't just about Adam versus Maya, wasn't just about custody or schedules or visitation rights. It was about a little girl who wanted a family, even if she had to build it herself. But even as the warmth of her embrace spread through me, I felt the chill of dread creep into my bones. Because I knew what everyone else in the room was thinking. They weren't marveling at the purity of a child's love. They were calculating, strategizing, turning this fragile moment into ammunition. For Maya, it was a chance to accuse me of manipulation. For Adam's lawyer, it was a weapon to prove our bond. For the judge, it was one more piece of evidence to weigh against countless others. And for me, it was the terrifying knowledge that something sacred had just been pulled into the cold machinery of the legal system. I closed my eyes for a second, breathing in the faint scent of Lily's hair, and wished I could shield her from all of it. But when I opened them again, I was still in that courtroom, still standing under the weight of everyone's stares, still caught in the center of a storm that was about to break. And as much as I wanted to protect her, as much as I wanted to hold on to the warmth of that hug forever, I couldn't ignore the truth, because none of them knew what I had promised Lily the night before. I wasn't searching for love, I was searching for a reason to stay alive. For years before I met Adam, my life felt like a shadow of itself, as though I was moving through rooms filled with people yet never truly seen, never really belonging anywhere. I had convinced myself that I was safer in solitude, that if I avoided the risks of love, then I could also avoid the inevitable losses that seemed to haunt me. My days blurred together in a monotonous loop: wake, work, eat, sleep. And even those simple tasks often felt heavier than they should have. I used to look out of windows at people laughing on sidewalks, lovers holding hands, parents ushering children into cars, and I would feel a pang of something so sharp it was both envy and grief tangled into one. Love wasn't for me, I told myself, because love meant loss, and I had already lost too much. It was on one of those gray afternoons, when the sky hung low and the city seemed weary, that I stumbled into the small coffee shop on the corner of Maple Street. I wasn't there for coffee. I was there because I needed somewhere quiet to breathe. My head was heavy from a sleepless night, and my hands shook as I fumbled with the strap of my bag. The place was nearly empty, just the faint hum of a machine, the smell of roasted beans, and the muffled sound of rain against the glass. I remember thinking I could sit alone in the corner, invisible to the world, just long enough to collect myself before walking back out. But fate has a way of finding you, even when you are desperate to hide. I noticed him before he noticed me. A man sitting at a small table near the window, a mug between his hands, though it looked untouched, his gaze fixed on nothing outside. There was a stillness about him, not the calm kind, but the sort of stillness that comes from exhaustion, from holding yourself together when the pieces inside are already breaking. His hair was dark, slightly unkempt, and his shirt, though clean, was wrinkled, as if he had dressed without thinking. What struck me most, though, wasn't his appearance. It was the weight in his eyes. He looked like someone who had seen too much, someone who carried a grief he didn't know how to set down. When the barista called out an order, he startled slightly, as if pulled from far away, and I caught the quick motion of him rubbing the bridge of his nose. In that instant, for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt a tug in my chest. Maybe it was recognition, because sadness knows sadness, and mine had been living inside me long enough to recognize its mirror in another. I didn't plan to speak to him, but life doesn't always follow the walls we build. I ordered tea, carried it carefully to my table, and sat near enough that when my bag slipped from the chair and scattered papers across the floor, he instinctively bent down to help me gather them. Our eyes met for the first time then, just briefly, and I saw it again. That shadowed heaviness, but also a flicker of something else, something almost tender. "You dropped this," he said, his voice low, steady, but carrying the rough edge of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. I murmured my thanks, embarrassed, and for a moment that should have ended it. But when I sat back down, he asked softly, "Do you come here often?" The kind of cliché line that, under any other circumstance, might have made me smile or dismiss the conversation. But when he said it, it didn't sound like a line at all. It sounded like a man asking if I belonged anywhere, because he himself didn't. That was how it began. Over the weeks that followed, our paths crossed more than once, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes by quiet arrangement. At first, we barely spoke beyond small fragments of conversation. The weather, the books stacked near the counter, the way the rain seemed endless that spring. But gradually something shifted. His words became longer, his eyes lifted more often, and I started to learn pieces of him like threads weaving into a tapestry I couldn't stop staring at. He told me his name was Adam. He didn't say much about himself at first, but I could sense the unspoken truths pressing behind his silence. Then one evening, when the shop was nearly closing, he confessed that he was in the middle of a divorce. His wife had left, the marriage had crumbled under years of arguments, and now he was fighting for custody of his daughter. The words came out flat, as though rehearsed, like he had said them too many times already to lawyers, to judges, to anyone who asked. But beneath that flatness, I heard the pain. He loved his daughter, that much was clear. Every time he mentioned her, his voice softened, his eyes flickered with light. But then came the bitterness, the mention of court hearings, of accusations, of weekends missed. I didn't know her name yet, didn't know her face, but I already understood that this child was his anchor, the one thing he was clinging to as the rest of his world dissolved. I should have walked away then. Every instinct in me screamed that this was too complicated, too fragile, too dangerous. I was a woman who had sworn never to entangle herself in broken families, never to stand in the crossfire of custody battles or risk becoming the stepmother figure I feared I could never live up to. Adam was gentle, yes, but he was surrounded by storms. and I had spent too long trying to escape my own storms to willingly step into someone else's. But every time I told myself to step back, I found myself stepping closer instead. It wasn't because he was charming. He wasn't, not in the conventional sense. It was because of his honesty, the quiet way he admitted his faults, the exhaustion in his shoulders that he didn't bother to hide. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't trying to win me over. He was simply existing, raw and unvarnished, and I hadn't realized how starved I was for something real until then. Still, I resisted. I kept my distance, reminded myself that I didn't want complications. I avoided personal questions. I deflected when he asked about my past. And yet, every time he mentioned his daughter, something inside me ached. Not because I wanted to meet her, but because I could feel how deeply she shaped his every decision, how fiercely he fought for her, and how terrified he was of losing her. That kind of devotion was rare, and it drew me in despite every warning my mind screamed at me. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Our conversations grew deeper, our silences grew more comfortable, and against my will, I began to imagine what it would be like to step into his world, to stand beside him in those battles, to share not just coffee and small talk, but life. It scared me more than I can describe, because I knew what stepping closer would mean. It would mean responsibility, vulnerability, risk. It would mean I could lose again. I was on the verge of pulling away for good, of cutting ties before they became chains, when Adam looked at me across the table one evening, his hands trembling as he gripped his mug, and asked, a question that stopped my heart. "Would you meet my daughter?" he said, and before I could even form a response, he added quietly, "But only if you promise me one thing." Cliffhanger. But one day, Adam asked me to meet his daughter, on one impossible condon. The first word she ever said to me wasn't hi. It was, "Can you make pancakes without burning them?" I remember the exact moment as vividly as if it were pressed into my skin like a scar. Adam had been nervously pacing the living room for almost an hour, checking his watch, smoothing the couch cushions, straightening a frame on the wall that didn't need straightening. His voice was lower than usual, careful, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes carried both hope and terror. He had warned me countless times that his daughter, Lily, wasn't like other children. She had seen too much, heard too much, endured too much in the endless tug-of-war between her parents. She was bright, sharper than most children her age, but she had also learned how to guard herself, how to measure people before letting them in. Adam kept repeating that she didn't warm up easily, that it might take months, maybe longer, for her to trust me. My own nerves mirrored his, because I wasn't sure I wanted her to trust me. Not yet. I was still fighting the weight of my own fears, the shadows of promises I had broken in my past, and the thought of a child looking at me and deciding whether I was worthy of being in her world filled me with a pressure I could barely breathe under. Meeting Lily wasn't just about meeting Adam's daughter. It was about stepping across an invisible line into a life I wasn't sure I was ready for. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped both of us out of our spiraling thoughts. Adam froze, his hand halfway to the doorknob, then exhaled so slowly it seemed like he was trying to release years of tension in one breath. When the door opened, she stepped inside. A small girl with a backpack nearly as large as her hair slightly tangled from the wind, her shoes scuffed from running. She didn't rush to her father, didn't fling her arms around him like I had foolishly imagined. Instead, she looked around the room like a detective scanning a crime scene, her eyes sharp, curious, calculating. And then, finally, she looked at me. I tried to smile, the kind of warm, harmless smile I hoped would say, "I'm safe. You don't have to worry." But before I could even open my mouth to introduce myself, she tilted her head, narrowed her eyes, and asked with startling seriousness, "Can you make pancakes without burning them?" The question caught me so off guard that I laughed. a nervous, awkward laugh that sounded too loud in the quiet room. Adam, embarrassed, rushed to say, "Lily, that's not how we say hello." But she ignored him, her gaze never leaving mine. In that instant, I realized it wasn't really about pancakes. It was a test. She wanted to know if I could meet her on her terms, if I could step into her world without dismissing her, if I could pass the invisible checkpoints she had created for anyone daring to get close to her father. So I answered carefully, bending slightly to her height, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can," I said, "but only if someone shows me the right way, because mine usually turn out funny-looking." For the first time, her lips twitched into something close to a smile. Not a full one, not trust, but the faintest crack in the wall she had built around herself. Adam's shoulders dropped with relief, but I knew better than to think I had passed the test. It was only the beginning. The evening unfolded slowly, like a series of negotiations. She set the rules without saying them aloud, and I had to figure out each one by paying attention. She asked if I liked to draw, and when I hesitated, she pushed a box of crayons toward me, as if daring me to refuse. I picked one up, awkwardly sketching a lopsided house, while she watched intently before adding a crooked sun above it. "You don't know how to draw either," she said with a tiny smirk. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected stir in me, a spark of protectiveness, of tenderness, the kind that comes when a child allows you into their private little games. Later, she asked me to sit with her at the table while she worked on a puzzle. She didn't need my help. She solved it faster than I could have. But she wanted me there, watching, acknowledging her. I realized then that her questions, her challenges, her sharp remarks weren't meant to push me away. They were her way of measuring whether I was willing to show up, to stay, even when she made it difficult. And slowly, without either of us noticing, the room shifted. The air grew softer. Adam's anxious glances eased, and I found myself laughing genuinely when she rolled her eyes at her father's clumsy joke, or when she announced that my drawing skills were tragic but funny. The evening ended with her declaring, in a tone both serious and playful, that I was allowed to stay for now. Adam's face glowed with gratitude, but I felt the weight of those words pressing into me. For now meant temporary, conditional, fragile. It meant I was on borrowed time. But even as I tried to keep my heart guarded, something inside me cracked open. Watching her frown in concentration as she arranged puzzle pieces, hearing the way she tried to stifle her giggle when Adam dropped a spoon in the kitchen, noticing how quickly she glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking. It all pulled at something deep within me. A protective instinct I had buried long ago rose to the surface, uninvited and unstoppable. Yet even in that warm bubble, Maya's shadow stretched across us. The evening had been planned so carefully, and yet she didn't show up on time to drop Lily off. She was nearly an hour late, no explanation, no apology, leaving Adam pacing and calling her phone in frustration while Lily sat quietly, pretending not to care. When she finally arrived to pick her up, she honked from the car instead of coming inside, and Lily's face tightened, her small shoulders stiffening. I watched Adam's jaw clench as he walked his daughter out, watched Lily glance back at me with an expression I couldn't decode, part curiosity, part longing, part unspoken question. And when the door closed, silence filled the room like smoke. I sat on the couch, staring at the crayon drawing she had left behind on the table, a crooked house with a crooked sun, and realized how fragile all of this was. I had stepped into a storm I didn't fully understand, and already I could feel how much power it had to break me. That night, as I lay in bed replaying every second of the evening, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and when I answered, a woman's voice drifted through the speaker. She whispered my name, slow and deliberate, and then she laughed. A cold, knowing laugh that sent shivers racing down my spine. That night my phone rang, and a woman's voice whispered my name before laughing. Some people fight with anger. Maya fought with charm. I had heard her name so many times before I ever saw her. It hung in the air like a warning, a storm cloud always threatening to break. Adam rarely spoke of her directly, but when he did, his voice carried the exhaustion of a man who had been through too many battles and had learned that winning was sometimes indistinguishable from losing. Lily mentioned her sparingly, often in little fragments that revealed more than she intended. An unfinished sentence, a tightened expression, the way she sometimes hesitated when asked about weekends at her mother's house. From all of it, I had built a vague, blurry picture of Maya in my mind, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of her presence. It happened one Saturday afternoon, when Adam and I took Lily to a local park. The air was bright with children's laughter, the smell of grass, the sound of swings creaking as parents pushed their kids higher and higher. I was sitting on a bench, watching Lily chase a butterfly across the field, when Adam stiffened beside me. I followed his gaze, and that was when I saw her. Maya walked toward us as though the world itself parted to make way for her. She wasn't striking in the obvious sense, but there was a magnetism about her, a deliberate way she carried herself that demanded attention. Her smile was wide, practiced, almost too perfect, and her eyes, though seemingly warm, glittered with something sharper, like glass hidden beneath silk. She wore casual clothes, but on her, even jeans and a simple blouse looked intentional, as if every detail had been calculated to say, "I am in control." When she reached us, she extended her hand to me before Adam could even speak. "You must be her," she said, her tone light, sweet, almost playful, but I caught the weight behind the words. Her. Not my name, not even an acknowledgement of me as a person, just the placeholder of someone temporary, someone passing through. I shook her hand, and for a moment it felt like touching velvet lined with steel. She leaned in just slightly, her perfume a little too strong, her smile a little too wide. "I've heard so much about you," she added, and though the words should have been polite, they landed like a blade slipping between ribs. Adam cleared his throat, his discomfort obvious, but Maya kept her eyes on me, a predator assessing prey. "You know," she continued softly, "Adam has always been good at finding companions. But they never last. You won't either. They never do." She laughed then, as if she were making a harmless joke, but her gaze never wavered, and I understood the laugh for what it was, a warning dressed as humor. I wanted to say something, anything, to defend myself, to push back against her deliberate attempt to unsettle me. But the words stuck in my throat, and instead I forced a polite smile, though my stomach churned. Adam's hand found mine beneath the bench, his grip firm, steadying. But even that couldn't quiet the storm Maya had unleashed inside me. She shifted her attention to Lily then, calling her name with exaggerated affection. Lily slowed, her joy dimming as she approached, her shoulders shrinking the closer she got. Maya bent down, brushing stray hair from Lily's face, cooing over her as though she were a doting mother. But I saw it. The way Lily's smile didn't reach her eyes, the way her small hands fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, the way she glanced back at me as if seeking silent reassurance. Maya noticed that glance too. Her smile faltered for the briefest second, and when her eyes flicked back to me, they were colder, sharper, a silent declaration of war. Without saying a word, she had made it clear. Lily was hers, and anyone who threatened that claim was an intruder. The encounter ended quickly, as if she had achieved exactly what she wanted. She kissed Lily on the cheek, stood gracefully, and with a parting smile that could have fooled anyone not paying attention, she said, "It was lovely meeting you. I'm sure we'll see each other. Often." And then she was gone, leaving behind the faint trail of perfume and the undeniable weight of her presence. I sat frozen, staring at the space she had occupied, my heart racing as though I had just walked through a battlefield. Adam finally exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "She shouldn't have cornered you like that." His voice carried a heaviness that went beyond the moment, the heaviness of a man who had been apologizing for her for years. That night, when Lily had gone to bed, I pressed Adam to tell me more. I needed to understand what I had just faced, what kind of war I was stepping into without fully realizing it. And so he told me, piece by piece, the story of his marriage, his divorce, and the years of conflict that had followed. He explained how Maya could charm anyone when she wanted to, judges, teachers, mutual friends, but behind closed doors, she wielded that charm like a weapon. She had fought him on every detail of custody, dragged him into court again and again, twisted every small mistake into evidence of unfitness. When Adam tried to keep peace, she accused him of being weak. When he defended himself, she accused him of being aggressive. No matter what he did, it was always wrong in her eyes. Listening to him, I felt both sorrow and fear. Sorrow for what he and Lily had endured, fear for what it meant that I was now part of it. Because as much as Adam tried to reassure me, as much as he insisted that Maya's words were just attempts to rattle me, I could still feel them burrowed under my skin. "You won't last." They never do. In the days that followed, her presence lingered like a shadow. I found myself second-guessing every interaction with Lily, every gesture with Adam, as though Maya's unseen eyes were constantly judging me, waiting for me to stumble. Even when she wasn't there, she was. Her laughter seemed to echo in my mind. Her smile flashed in my memory, her warning whispered through my doubts. And slowly, insidiously, the seeds she had planted began to grow. What if she was right? What if I wasn't strong enough to weather the storms she had mastered? What if I hurt Lily without meaning to? What if I became just another woman Adam had brought into his daughter's life, only for her to watch disappear? I wanted to push those thoughts away, but they clung to me like vines, tightening whenever I tried to pull free. I told myself I could be stronger than Maya's games, that I could hold my ground for Adam and Lily. But late at night, when the house was quiet and my defenses were lowered, I couldn't silence the gnawing fear that perhaps I was already losing. And then, just when I thought I might find my footing again, the war became official. Because a week later, a letter arrived in the mail, subpoena. Thought love was private, but court made it evidence. When I first began spending time with Adam, I believed our love lived in small, invisible spaces. The quiet conversations over tea, the way his hand brushed mine when we crossed the street, the comfort of sitting together in silence when words felt too heavy. To me, love was something delicate, personal, sacred. It belonged to us, not to the world, and certainly not to the cold machinery of the legal system. But I was wrong. Because once custody battles begin, nothing remains sacred. Even love becomes something you are forced to measure, defend, and submit like paperwork in a courtroom. The first intrusion came in the form of the social workers. They didn't arrive like enemies. In fact, their voices were polite, their smiles professional, their clipboards neat. But their very presence in our home felt like a judgment, like unseen hands rearranging the air around us. They walked through each room slowly, taking notes on things that had never seemed significant before. The arrangement of furniture, the safety locks on cabinets, the condition of the bathroom tiles. I found myself scrambling internally, trying to imagine what they saw when they looked around. Did the mismatched plates in the kitchen make us seem careless? Did the pile of books on the coffee table look like clutter or culture? Did my presence, sitting on the edge of the couch like an intruder in my own life, count for us or against us? When they finally turned their attention to me, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. They asked about my role in the household, how often I was present, what kind of relationship I had with Lily. Their voices were calm, but their pens moved quickly. and I felt every answer carve itself into a record that might one day be read aloud in front of a judge. I tried to speak carefully, to sound both truthful and reassuring, but every word felt like walking on a tightrope with no net below. Too much affection, and they might accuse me of overstepping. Too little, and they might conclude that I was detached. When they asked how Lily felt about me, my throat closed. I wanted to say that she laughed with me, that she trusted me with her secrets, that she had once leaned against me on the couch and fallen asleep as if my presence was safe. But how could I say those things without sounding as though I were stealing her from her mother? I settled on words that felt thin, inadequate, a fragile attempt to capture something too real to reduce to sentences. We're still learning each other, but I care about her deeply. Even as I spoke, I knew the answer would never capture the truth. How could any form, any note, any testimony capture what it meant when Lily slipped her small hand into mine during a thunderstorm? Or how it felt when she laughed so hard at one of Adam's clumsy jokes that she snorted and then blushed? Love isn't quantifiable. But here, in this system, everything had to be measured, even the immeasurable. The pressure grew heavier with every visit. Adam, already worn thin by the endless cycle of paperwork and hearings, grew more restless, more haunted. Nights became consumed by documents spread across the dining table. Forms that needed signing, statements that needed revising, lists of dates that had to be remembered with surgical precision. He would sit with his head in his hands, muttering about deadlines, while I tried to soothe Lily to sleep in the next room. But children have ears sharper than adults give them credit for, and no matter how softly we argued, Lily heard enough. One night, long after she should have been asleep, I heard muffled sobs coming from behind her bedroom door. When I pushed it open gently, I found her curled up beneath the blanket, clutching her stuffed rabbit so tightly it looked painful. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with the fear of a child who doesn't understand everything but understands enough. She whispered through her sobs, "Are they going to take me away from Daddy?" The question broke me. I wanted to promise her that no one could ever separate her from Adam, that everything would be fine, that love was enough to win. But I couldn't lie, because in that moment I didn't know. All I could do was hold her, whisper that she was safe tonight, that she was loved beyond measure, and hope it was enough to calm the storm raging in her little heart. But when I left her room that night, I pressed my back against the wall and slid down to the floor, choking back my own tears. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Not in court, not on paper, not in a world where affection can be twisted into evidence. The lawyer didn't make things easier. He was efficient, sharp, and relentless, the kind of man who saw every relationship as a puzzle to be solved for maximum advantage. During one late meeting, after a particularly brutal day of depositions, he turned to me and said, "You should prepare yourself. There's a chance you'll be called as a witness." The room spun. My palms went cold, and I stared at him, unable to form words. Me? I wasn't family, not in the legal sense. I wasn't married to Adam. I wasn't Lily's mother. I was just someone who had stumbled into their lives, trying to offer love where love was already bruised. But in the lawyer's eyes, my presence was evidence of stability or instability, depending on how the court chose to see it. "They'll want to know how you fit into Lily's world," he said matter-of-factly, as though this wasn't my greatest fear made real. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining myself on the witness stand, every detail of my past dragged into the light, every mistake dissected. I imagined Maya's lawyer twisting my words, painting me as an interloper, as someone who had no right to be in Lily's life, someone reckless, unstable, dangerous. And worst of all, I imagined Lily sitting there, watching, listening, absorbing every venomous word. The weight of it pressed on me day after day, until I found myself flinching at the smallest questions, guarding my every move, afraid that something as simple as a misplaced comment could one day be repeated in court. Even laughter felt dangerous, as though joy itself might be twisted into a weapon. When the social workers returned for another interview, I sat rigid on the couch, my hands clasped tightly together. Their questions rolled out smoothly, polite but probing, designed to cut through rehearsed answers. I managed to steady my voice, to speak calmly about routines, about meals, about helping with homework. But then, just as the meeting seemed to be drawing to a close, one of them glanced up from her notes, her eyes narrowing slightly. Her voice was calm, almost casual, but the question carried a weight that made my stomach twist. "Now, I'd like to ask you something. Not about Adam, but about you." The social worker's last question wasn't about Adam. It was about me. I swore I'd never let a child depend on me again. Those words had lived in the deepest corners of my heart for years, a vow carved not out of strength, but out of failure. Long before I ever met Adam or Lily, before I ever stepped into the shadow of custody hearings and legal battles, I carried a wound that shaped the way I saw myself. It wasn't a story I told easily, because even now the memory carried shame, regret, and the unbearable weight of what-ifs. When I was younger, my parents fostered children. It was supposed to be a noble thing, a way of opening our home to those who needed one. But what I remember most wasn't the idealism. It was the fragility. Children arrived with bags too small to carry their pain, with eyes too old for their years, with a silence that was louder than any words. Among them was one girl, slightly younger than me, who stayed for almost a year. Her name was Emily, and though we weren't related by blood, we became inseparable. She clung to me in ways she never clung to the adults, followed me through the house, whispered secrets she couldn't tell anyone else. She called me her sister, and I believed her. At first, I loved it. I loved being needed, loved the way her trust made me feel important, irreplaceable. But as months passed, I began to crumble under the weight of it. Emily's fears, her nightmares, her questions about why her real parents weren't coming back, she handed them all to me, and I was too young to know how to carry them. I promised her I'd always be there, but I couldn't keep that promise. One night, after a particularly difficult argument between her and my mother, she came to me crying, asking me if I would still be her sister even if she left. And instead of reassuring her, I froze. I was tired, I was selfish, and I told her I didn't know. A week later, she was moved to another home. I didn't get to say goodbye properly. I don't know if she thought my hesitation meant I didn't love her, or if she thought I had abandoned her, but I have carried that moment with me every single day since. The image of her small face, the way her eyes searched mine for reassurance I failed to give, still comes to me at night. I swore then that I would never again let a child rely on me, never again risk holding a fragile heart only to let it shatter. That was the secret I carried into my relationship with Adam. It was the reason I hesitated when he first introduced me to Lily, the reason I resisted becoming part of their world, the reason I told myself again and again that I wasn't built to be a stepmother. It wasn't that I didn't want to love. It was that I didn't trust myself not to fail. Every time, Lily laughed at one of my clumsy attempts to cook. Every time she leaned closer while drawing pictures at the table, every time she asked me a question that was heavier than her years, I felt both joy and dread. Joy because I was being allowed into her world. Dread because I knew what it meant to hold that kind of trust and lose it. Guilt became my constant companion, whispering in my ear that history would repeat itself, that no matter how hard I tried, I would fail Lily the same way I had failed Emily. It shaped everything I did. When Adam asked me to stay for dinner with them, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I feared becoming a fixture in Lily's routine. When Lily slipped her small hand into mine on the way to school, I panicked internally, as though her simple trust was a weight I wasn't strong enough to carry. Even when Adam looked at me with gratitude, with love, I felt the guilt rise like a tide, reminding me that I was a liability, not a blessing. There were nights I lay awake beside Adam, watching him sleep, and wondered if the kindest thing I could do was leave before Lily attached herself to me too deeply. If I walked away early enough, she might only remember me as a fleeting figure, not someone she trusted and lost. But then I would hear her laughter echo in my mind, or picture the way her eyes lit up when she beat me at a board game, and I couldn't bear the thought of being another adult who disappeared from her life. The internal conflict gnawed at me endlessly. Stay and risk repeating my failure. Leave and guarantee it. Neither choice felt safe, and the more I loved them, the heavier the decision became. Adam sensed something was wrong, though he didn't press me for details. One evening, when the house was quiet, he brushed my hair back gently and whispered, "You're good for her, you know. You're good for both of us." His words pierced me, because he didn't know the truth, that I had once been the opposite of good, that I had once let someone down so completely I still woke at night to the sound of her crying. He couldn't see the guilt woven into every smile I gave, every gesture I offered. And yet, no matter how much I tried to shield Lily from the full weight of my fears, children have a way of sensing what adults think they hide. Lily was sharp, intuitive, more observant than anyone gave her credit for. She noticed the way my smile sometimes faltered when she asked me to stay longer. She noticed the way my hands trembled slightly when she reached for me in public, as though I wasn't sure whether I was allowed to hold her hand. She noticed everything. It was after one of those moments, when I had pulled away too quickly from her touch, that she surprised me. We had been sitting together on the couch, Adam in the kitchen, the TV murmuring quietly in the background. Lily leaned against me, drawing something in her small notebook. I tried to focus on the program, to calm the storm inside, me, when I felt the faintest brush against my side. I looked down to see her slipping something into the pocket of my sweater. Her eyes flicked up to mine for just a second, and there was no accusation in them, no anger, just quiet determination, as if she had made up her mind about something. I froze, my hand instinctively brushing against the folded paper she had left behind. My heart raced as I wondered what it could be, why she had given it to me silently, without explanation. And in that instant, all of my fears, all of my guilt, all of my secrets collided with one terrifying realization. Lily wasn't just testing me anymore. She was trusting me with something that mattered. Then Lily slipped a folded note into my pocket. It wasn't a love letter, it was a map. When I pulled the folded paper from my pocket later that night, I expected the kind of note a child might slip secretly into the hands of someone they trusted. Maybe a scribbled drawing of flowers, or a simple "thank you," or even a question she hadn't been brave enough to ask aloud. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the creased paper, careful not to tear the edges, because something about the way Lily had slipped it into my pocket, silent, deliberate, and with that strange look in her eyes, told me this was not an ordinary gesture. What I found inside made my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. It was a map. A hand-drawn map, messy with crayon lines, arrows, and uneven shapes. At first glance, it almost looked playful, the kind of thing a child might create during art time at school. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just imagination. This was strategy. Lily had drawn her mother's house, the street leading away from it, the park nearby, and finally a winding path that curved toward another house. My house. And at the spot where she had sketched it, she had drawn a bright yellow star. Next to it, in careful, uneven handwriting, she had written a single word: safe. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My hands shook, the crayon lines blurring as tears filled my eyes. This wasn't a game, wasn't a piece of childish creativity. This was a plan, an escape plan. My mind raced with the implication of it. Lily was only a child, But she had already thought through what she would do if things got bad. She had drawn her route, her destination, her sanctuary. And she had marked me. Not her father, not her grandparents, not anyone else, but me as the place she would run. I pressed the paper against my chest, trying to steady my breathing, and the weight of it sank deeper than anything I had ever carried before. This wasn't just trust. It was desperation disguised as innocence. Children don't plan escapes unless they feel trapped. Children don't draw stars labeled safe unless safety feels like a rare and fleeting thing. I couldn't stop thinking about what this meant. I had seen the way Lily stiffened when Maya appeared, the way her laughter dimmed when her mother's name was mentioned, the way she sometimes hesitated to speak about weekends at her mom's house. Adam had hinted at tension, at inconsistency, at arguments behind closed doors, but he had never painted the picture fully. And now, here it was, drawn in shaky crayon by the hands of a little girl who didn't have the words to explain her fear, so she made a map instead. The realization crushed me, because in that moment, Lily trusted me more than anyone else. More than her mother, obviously, but also, painfully, even more than Adam. She hadn't drawn a star over her father's house. She hadn't written safe near him. She had chosen me. And while part of me was overwhelmed with a fierce, protective love, another part of me was racked with guilt. What did it mean that she saw me as safer than her own father, who loved her more than life itself? What kind of burden had she placed in my hands without even realizing it? I stared at that map for hours, unable to put it down. The lines grew heavier in my mind the longer I looked. I imagined Lily clutching her crayons, pressing hard against the paper, trying to capture her way out. I imagined her whispering the word safe under her breath as she wrote it, believing it the way a child believes in stars, in wishes, in fairy tales. And I imagined her small voice shaking as she wondered if one day she would need to use it for real. The guilt returned like a wave crashing over me. How could I ever live up to that trust? What if she needed me and I failed her, just as I had failed Emily all those years ago? What if, in her most desperate moment, she ran to me and I couldn't protect her? The thought made me sick with dread. But there was something else, too. A strange, undeniable strength that rose in me as I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into my pocket. Because even though fear told me I might fail, love told me I had to try. That little girl had chosen me as her refuge, and no matter what my past whispered, I couldn't abandon her now. The next morning I carried that note with me everywhere I went. I couldn't bring myself to show Adam, not yet, because I wasn't sure what it would do to him. He was already drowning in legal battles, paperwork, and exhaustion. To tell him that his daughter had drawn an escape plan might break him in ways I couldn't repair. And so, I kept the secret tucked against my chest, close enough to remind me of the responsibility I hadn't asked for but could no longer refuse. Every time Lily looked at me that week, every time her eyes lingered a little longer than necessary, I wondered if she was waiting for me to acknowledge it, waiting for me to say, I saw your map, I understand your fear, and I will protect you if it comes to that. But I didn't say it aloud. Instead, I let my actions speak. I stayed close, I listened carefully, I held her hand when she reached for mine. Yet the fear never left me. Because maps can be destroyed, but in courtrooms they can also be weaponized. If anyone else ever saw that note, if Maya got her hands on it, she could twist it into a story I couldn't defend. She would say I had encouraged Lily, manipulated her, planted ideas of escape into her mind. The judge might see it as proof that I was interfering, that I was dangerous, that I was trying to pull Lily away from her mother. The map, so fragile and pure in its intention, could become poison in the wrong hands. And that was the thought that kept me awake at night. Not just the beauty of Lily's trust, but the danger of it. That folded piece of paper carried her heart. but it could also destroy us all if revealed in the wrong light. As I lay in bed one night, the note tucked safely beneath my pillow, I closed my eyes and prayed silently that no one else would ever see it, because I knew, deep in my bones, that if the judge saw this map, he wouldn't see Lily's fear or her longing for safety. He would see evidence, and evidence in a courtroom rarely carries the truth the way a child intends it to. But if the judge saw this note, everything could collapse. We rehearsed the truth like lines in a play. That was how the evening began. Our lawyer sitting across from us at the dining table, his voice steady but sharp, drilling us on questions and answers as though our lives depended on memorization. In many ways, they did. Every word we spoke in that courtroom tomorrow would be weighed, twisted, dissected. A misplaced sentence, a nervous pause, a slip of the tongue could shift the balance of custody. And Adam knew it. His jaw was tight, his fingers restless against the stack of papers he had already memorized, his eyes darting toward Lily as if to remind himself of why he was enduring all of this. The lawyer's questions came one after another. What is Lily's bedtime routine? How do you ensure she gets to school on time? Who usually prepares her meals? Adam answered carefully, though his voice sometimes cracked, betraying the stress pressing down on him. When it was my turn, my hands grew clammy. How often are you in the home? What role do you play in Lily's day-to-day life? Each answer felt like a trap, because honesty was not enough here. It had to be the right kind of honesty, framed in a way that could withstand attack. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to imagine my words not as confessions but as shields. Still, my heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. Lily sat quietly at the corner of the table, swinging her legs beneath the chair. At first, she seemed too young to be part of this grim rehearsal, but as the lawyer turned to her, her posture straightened. "What do you like to do when you're with your dad?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then said softly, "He makes pancakes, but they're always lumpy. I eat them anyway." The room lightened for just a second with our laughter, but the lawyer's expression remained serious. "If the judge asks you where you feel safest, what will you say?" Lily hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to her father. "With Dad," she whispered, but her glance at me lingered, and I knew she was holding back the full truth, that in her secret map, the star of safety was drawn over my apartment. That knowledge burned in my chest, but I forced a steady smile, unwilling to betray the weight of what I carried. The rehearsal dragged late into the evening until Adam finally broke. He pushed the papers away, burying his face in his hands, and for the first time since I had known him, he wept openly. His shoulders shook, his breath came in jagged gasps, and his voice cracked as he whispered, "What if I lose her? What if tomorrow they decide I'm not enough?" I moved instinctively, my hand resting on his back, my own throat tightening with tears I fought to hold back. There was no easy comfort to offer him, no guarantee I could give. Love, as I had learned, was not enough in a courtroom where laws and arguments overshadowed hearts. But watching him break reminded me of something essential. This wasn't about winning or losing for pride or control. It was about a father who loved his child so fiercely that the thought of losing her fractured him. Lily slipped off her chair and padded softly to her father's side. She touched his arm, her small hand trembling, and whispered, "Daddy, I don't want to live without you." The words gutted him, and he gathered her into his lap, holding her as though she might vanish. I turned away for a moment, tears blurring my vision, because witnessing their bond reminded me of the fragile line we all balanced on. Later that night, when Adam had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the couch, Lily crept into my room. She stood in the doorway, her face pale in the dim light, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will you still be here if he loses?" The question pierced me like a blade. She wasn't asking casually. She was asking with the desperation of someone who had already imagined the worst, who had rehearsed the scenario of being pulled away from her father, who needed to know if I would remain when everything else changed. Should have chosen my words carefully. I should have told her that no matter what happened, adults would figure out a way, that she didn't need to worry, that love wasn't measured by court decisions. But instead, I gave her the only answer my heart could force, past my lips. Yes, Lily, I'll stay. No matter what, it was a dangerous promise, one I had no authority to make, but the relief in her eyes as she crawled into bed beside me silenced my doubts. She curled against me, her breath evening out, and I held her until sleep carried her away. In the quiet darkness, my heart twisted with guilt, because I knew what promises meant, and I knew how fragile they could be when tested. Hours passed, the house falling into silence except for the occasional rustle of papers as Adam shifted restlessly on the couch. I drifted in and out of uneasy sleep until the buzz of Adam's phone on the table jolted me awake. The glow of the screen illuminated his weary face as he reached for it, and I watched confusion harden into anger as he scrolled. He sat up straight, his jaw clenching, and shoved the phone into my hands. "Look at this," he said, his voice tight. On the screen was a photograph, recently uploaded, already gaining traction online. It showed Adam in his car, Lily in the back seat, but the image had been framed and captioned to suggest neglect. The angle made it look as though she wasn't buckled properly, as though Adam had been careless. The post, written by Maya, was filled with carefully chosen words. "So sad when a father puts his own child at risk. Courts should really reconsider who deserves custody." I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. I remembered the moment that picture must have been taken. We had been parked, engine off, waiting for her to finish a snack before heading inside. Lily's belt had been unfastened because she was climbing out when Maya must have snapped the shot. It was a lie, a weapon disguised as concern, designed to smear Adam's name on the eve of the hearing. The likes, comments, and shares were already multiplying. Strangers who knew nothing of our lives were chiming in, condemning Adam, questioning his fitness as a father. The lawyer's warnings echoed in my head. Perception could be as powerful as fact in a courtroom. I gripped the phone, my stomach twisting with dread, because even though I knew the truth, the internet had already chosen its version of reality. The picture was a lie, but the internet believed it. A single picture can lie more than 1,000 words. When I first saw the photograph, I felt my breath leave me like someone had struck me in the chest. It was just one frame, one frozen moment caught by a lens, but it was weaponized with such precision that it almost looked believable. In the picture, Adam sat in the driver's seat of his car, his eyes tired, his posture slightly slouched, and in the back seat, Lily appeared to be shifting out of her belt. The way the photo had been cropped, the angle at which it was taken, and the caption that accompanied it, all of it combined to tell a story that was not only false, but dangerous. "So sad to see a father who puts his own child at risk," the words beneath the post read, dripping with false concern, followed by a plea that courts should reevaluate custody before something tragic happens. The photo spread quickly. Within hours, strangers had already passed judgment, their comments piling beneath the post like stones thrown at Adam's reputation. "What kind of father doesn't buckle his child?" one wrote. "If he's careless in public, imagine what happens behind closed doors," another added. The cruelty of it was not just in the lies themselves, but in the way people so readily believed them. They didn't know Adam. They didn't know Lily. But in the echo chamber of the internet, one carefully curated image outweighed years of devotion. Adam was furious, pacing the living room like a caged animal. He kept running his hand through his hair, his voice rising as he muttered about lies, manipulation, the impossibility of defending yourself once the narrative had already taken root. I tried to steady him, to remind him that truth still mattered in court, that we had proof, that we could dismantle Maya's story. But even as I said it, I felt the same cold dread he did, because we both knew that in custody battles, perception was as dangerous as fact. Judges might not admit it, but they were human too, swayed by appearances, by impressions, by the fear of making the wrong call. Our lawyer advised us immediately to gather evidence. That single photograph couldn't stand unchallenged. We pulled up the time-stamped receipts from that day, showing that Adam's car had been parked outside the grocery store. We retrieved the transaction logs proving we hadn't been driving when Maya snapped that picture. Even more damning, we had a witness, a neighbor who had walked past the car as Lily unbuckled herself in preparation to get out. Piece by piece, we built the truth, but it felt like trying to stitch together silk torn apart by blades. For every receipt, for every timestamp, there were 100 comments online insisting Adam was a negligent father. Lily noticed the tension. Children always do. She wandered into the living room during one of our frantic evidence-gathering sessions, her small face clouded with worry. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked softly, and the question sliced through me. We rushed to reassure her, to explain that none of this was her fault, that adults sometimes told lies when they were angry. But the damage was already there in her eyes, the growing awareness that her life had become a battlefield where her safety was questioned, her father's love put on trial. It was in the middle of that storm that my phone buzzed with a message I didn't expect. It was from Lily's teacher. I hadn't spoken to her outside of school events, but her words appeared on my screen with urgency. "I saw the post. I need you to know it's not true. Adam is a good father." Relief flooded me for a moment. Here was someone outside our home, someone credible, who had witnessed Adam's devotion firsthand. The teacher described how Adam never missed school meetings, how he checked Lily's homework, how he was always the one waiting patiently at pickup even when other parents rushed. Her message was kind, supportive, and for a brief moment, it felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. I showed it to Adam, and I watched his shoulders loosen just slightly, his eyes softening as though he had been reminded that not everyone believed Maya's lies. But the message wasn't finished. As I scrolled, I found one final sentence, tacked on at the end, a sentence that sent a chill running down my spine. "There's something else you should ask Lily about, the closet." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made my stomach twist. I read them again and again, hoping I had misunderstood, but the meaning didn't change. The teacher had emphasized it, urging me silently to bring it up, to dig deeper, to uncover something we hadn't seen. I looked over at Lily then, sitting cross-legged on the rug, drawing absent-mindedly in her notebook, oblivious to the storm swirling around her. Her innocence made the message all the more haunting. What did the teacher know? What had she seen? And what was hidden in that single, ominous word? Closet? I folded the phone against my chest, my pulse racing as Adam continued to organize receipts beside me. I didn't tell him yet, not because I wanted to keep secrets, but because I couldn't bring myself to speak the words aloud. Because once I did, once I asked the question the teacher had urged me to, I knew nothing would ever be the same. She wrote, "Ask Lily about the closet." I raised my right hand and realized which truths cut deepest. The courtroom was colder that morning than I remembered it ever being. The hum of whispered conversations filled the air as people shuffled papers, adjusted ties, and prepared for the battle that was about to unfold. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart pounding in my chest with a rhythm so violent I wondered if the sound carried across the room. I had tried to prepare myself, had told myself over and over that I would not be called, that I was only there to support Adam, to sit quietly behind him and let the lawyers do their work. But when my name was spoken, sharp and clear, every ounce of air seemed to vanish from my lungs. The bailiff motioned for me to step forward. My knees trembled as I rose from the bench, every eye in the room following me, dissecting me, measuring me. Adam turned his head slightly, his eyes filled with both apology and desperation, silently telling me he hadn't wanted this either, but that we had no choice. As I walked toward the witness, "Stand," I thought of Lily, her small hands clutching her crayon map, her voice whispering promises into the dark. I thought of Emily, the foster sister I had failed years before, the one who still haunted my nights. And I thought of the vow I had made never to let a child depend on me again, a vow I was about to break in front of a judge under oath. The bailiff's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," I whispered, though the words felt heavy, like iron chains clamping around my chest. The lawyer for Maya approached, his expression calm but his eyes sharp, like a hawk circling prey. He didn't waste time. "Please state your relationship to Mr. Adam Carter." I swallowed, gripping the edges of the wooden chair. "I'm his partner," I said. "And how long have you been involved with him?" I gave the timeline, careful to keep my voice steady. He leaned closer. "So you are not married, correct? You have no legal tie to him or his daughter?" The words struck like darts, designed to shrink me, to remind the court that I was, in their eyes, an outsider. "No," I admitted. He nodded slowly, circling me with questions designed to corner. "And yet you've been spending significant time with his daughter? Helping with her meals, her homework, even bedtime?" "Yes," I said carefully. His brow arched. "Would you say she depends on you?" The question sliced into me. I hesitated, because to say yes was to admit to stepping into the role of a mother, something Maya would seize upon as proof I was interfering. But to say no felt like a betrayal of Lily, as though I were erasing the trust she had placed in me. My silence stretched, and I felt the lawyer's eyes gleam, as though he had found the fracture line. "She trusts me," I finally said softly. "But she depends on her father." For a moment, I thought I had found the balance, but the lawyer wasn't finished. He flipped through his papers before pulling one out with a flourish. "You've been in foster care situations before, haven't you?" The room tilted. My stomach dropped, because I hadn't expected him to dig into my past, hadn't expected Emily to resurface here, in this cold chamber. "Yes," I admitted, my voice trembling despite my effort to remain steady. "Tell the court," he pressed. "Isn't it true that a child once relied on you and you failed her?" The words detonated inside me. I wanted to fight back, to argue that I had been only a child myself, that I hadn't had the tools or the power to protect Emily. But the memory rose like a wave, drowning me. The night she asked if I would always be her sister, the moment I hesitated, the way she left without goodbye. The guilt that had shadowed me for years was suddenly spotlighted, dragged out for strangers to dissect. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I sat taller, gripping the edges of the stand until my knuckles whitened. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking but firm. "Yes, a child trusted me once, and I let her down. And I have carried that with me every day since. But it is precisely because of that failure that I will never, ever let it happen again. Not with Lily." The courtroom was silent for a beat, the air heavy with the weight of my confession. For the first time, the lawyer faltered, unsure how to twist my words. My shame had already been spoken aloud, transformed into a vow. Adam's lawyer rose then, redirecting the questioning. He asked about the nights I stayed up comforting Lily after nightmares, about the afternoons I helped her with school projects, about the small rituals of pancakes and puzzles that had become part of our world. As I spoke, my voice steadied, because these were not things that could be fabricated. They were lived moments, etched into me as deeply as scars. The judge leaned forward, his gaze sharper now, not dismissive, but thoughtful. I could feel him weighing my sincerity, my pain, my love. For the first time since stepping onto the stand, I felt something shift. Not in the lawyer's favor, not in Maya's favor, but in Lily's. Because beneath all the questions, all the paperwork, all the accusations, this was about her. I thought my part was over when the judge raised his hand. Relief nearly made me sag in my chair, but then his next words froze me. "Thank you," he said, his voice even. "You may step down. But before we proceed further, I would like to hear directly from Lily." The air thickened instantly. I looked at Adam, whose face paled as though the ground had been yanked from under him. Maya's smile curved upward, thin and triumphant, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. My heart raced, dread clawing at my chest. Lily was just a child, too young to carry the burden of deciding her own fate, too young to stand in front of a room filled with strangers and be asked to articulate truths that even adults struggled to admit. And yet, the judge had spoken. The bailiff moved toward the benches, his voice echoing across the chamber. And that's when the bailiff called Lily forward. Children aren't supposed to pick sides. Sometimes they pick survival. The moment Lily's name was called, my heart dropped into my stomach. She was so small, sitting there on the hard bench, her feet barely touching the floor, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. When the bailiff gestured for her to come forward, she hesitated for just a second, glancing at Adam first, then at me, before slowly standing up. Her legs wobbled as she began walking toward the front of the courtroom, and I wanted nothing more than to run to her, scoop her into my arms, and shield her from the weight of all those watchful eyes. But I couldn't. None of us could. She had to walk that path alone. The courtroom shifted with her every step. Lawyers leaned forward, pens ready, eager to catch every word she would say. The judge's face softened slightly, though his posture remained rigid, his hands folded neatly as though to remind everyone that what was about to happen was not play acting, but evidence. Maya's smile gleamed faintly, cold and satisfied, as though she expected Lily to echo the story she had crafted for her. And Adam sat frozen, his face pale, his breath shallow, his knuckles pressed so tightly against his knees that they turned white. I could feel his silent plea radiating across the space. "Please, Lily, please tell them the truth." The bailiff guided her to the witness chair, where the judge leaned forward gently. "Lily," he said, his tone surprisingly kind, "you don't have to be afraid. We just want to hear from you, in your own words, what your life is like. Do you understand?" She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. For a moment, silence filled the room so completely that I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan above us. Then, in a voice so soft that I had to strain to hear it, she began to speak. She didn't talk about custody, or visitation schedules, or parental responsibility. She talked about pancakes. She told the judge how her dad always tried to make them on Saturday mornings, even though they came out lumpy and sometimes half-burned. She told him that I pretended to like the crispy ones, and that her dad laughed every time she teased him about needing pancake lessons. Her small voice carried across the courtroom like a fragile song, and though her words were simple, they held a truth no piece of legal jargon could capture. She spoke about routines, the way Adam tucked her in at night, the silly bedtime stories he sometimes made up when she begged for just one more. She spoke about the mornings when he braided her hair badly but tried anyway, about how he always remembered to pack her favorite snacks for school, about how he never forgot to kiss her forehead even when he was rushing. These were not facts that could be written into court documents. They were moments of love stitched into daily life. And as she spoke, even the lawyer who had grilled me earlier seemed to falter, his pen resting still against his notepad. Then her voice grew even softer, trembling as she whispered, "I feel safe with Dad. And I feel safe with her too." She glanced in my direction then, her small eyes locking onto mine, and the breath caught in my throat. The courtroom followed her gaze, and suddenly all eyes were on me again. My heart hammered so loudly it drowned out everything else. The judge cleared his throat gently. "Who do you mean, Lily?" She pointed at me. "Her," she said simply. "She makes me feel safe." The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was electric, a hush so charged it felt like the very walls were holding their breath. Maya shifted sharply in her seat, her smile cracking for the first time, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the table. Adam's head dropped into his hands, overcome, though whether with relief or fear I couldn't tell. And me? I sat, frozen, tears burning my eyes, because I knew what those words meant. Then Lily did something no one expected. She slid down from the witness chair, her little shoes clicking softly against the polished floor as she walked. Not back to her mother, not even to her father, but straight toward me. Every step was deliberate, unhurried, as though she were marching against the weight of everything holding her down. And when she reached me, she wrapped her arms around my waist with a force that nearly knocked the breath out of me. The room erupted in murmurs, the judge banging his gavel for order. But all I could feel were Lily's arms holding me tight, her cheek pressed against me as though she were clinging to the one anchor she trusted in that moment. I bent slightly, my hand trembling as I brushed her hair back, unable to stop the tears that finally spilled down my cheeks. And then she spoke. Not to the judge, not to the lawyers, but to me. Her words were soft, but they cut through the chaos with the clarity of a bell. "You can marry my dad if you want." The air vanished from the room. Gasps rippled through the audience, and for a heartbeat, even the judge seemed stunned into silence. The words hung there, fragile but unshakable, impossible to ignore. Maya's face twisted, her composure splintering, while Adam stared at me with eyes so wide and full of raw emotion that I had to look away. I wanted to hold her tighter, to tell her how much her words meant, to promise her that I would never leave. But all I could do was stand frozen, wrapped in the embrace of a child who had just shifted the course of everything with one sentence. The courtroom eventually quieted, the judge regaining control, the gavel striking again and again until the murmurs died down. But the silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. Everyone had heard it. Everyone had seen it, and there was no taking it back. Lily returned reluctantly to her seat, her small frame trembling but her head held high. I caught Adam's gaze across the room, his eyes glistening, his expression unreadable. Hope? Fear? Love? All of it swirled together in a storm neither of us could escape. The judge shuffled his papers, his face unreadable as he prepared to speak. My heart pounded so violently it hurt. I had no idea what he was about to say, no idea how he would interpret Lily's words, her hug, her declaration. Would he see it as the pure truth of a child's heart? Or would he see it as manipulation, as interference, as something dangerous? The weight of it pressed down on all of us. And then the gavel struck once more. But the judge's ruling wasn't the ending I expected. Winning custody isn't the same as winning a family. The judge's gavel struck with a finality that made my stomach twist. His voice, steady and firm, filled the courtroom as he read out the verdict, and though I tried to prepare myself, each word landed heavier than the last. He acknowledged the love Adam had for Lily, the clear bond between them, the evidence we had presented to counter Maya's accusations. But he also recognized Lily's need for balance, her right to maintain a relationship with both parents, however fractured. The ruling was delivered carefully, deliberately, like someone laying fragile glass across stone. Shared custody, structured schedules, mandatory family therapy sessions. Neither parent would walk away victorious. Neither would leave fully defeated. On the surface, it was a compromise. For Adam, it meant relief, that Lily wouldn't be taken away from him completely, that the bond he had fought so hard to protect would not be severed. For Maya, it was a reminder that her charm could not erase the cracks in her home, that her manipulations had limits. For me, sitting there with my hands clasped tightly in my lap, it was something else entirely. It was proof that the court could define guardianship, could dictate schedules, could mark calendars with ink and signatures, but it could never legislate love. It could decide who held custody, but it couldn't decide who held Lily's heart. When the gavel struck a final time and the courtroom began to empty, Adam leaned against the bench, his body sagging with exhaustion. He exhaled a long, trembling breath, his eyes wet but his smile small, cautious, almost hesitant. He reached for my hand, gripping it tightly, as though anchoring himself against the tide of uncertainty that still surrounded us. "She's still mine," he whispered hoarsely. "They can't take her from me." I nodded, pressing my forehead against his shoulder. But inside I knew the truth. Yes, Lily would remain in his life, but the storm wasn't over. Court orders could change. Therapy could uncover new battles. And Maya was not the type to surrender quietly. That night, when we returned home, the air in the house felt different. Adam sat at the table staring at the paperwork, his fingers tracing the stamped seals and signatures as though they were both salvation and curse. Lily, exhausted from the long day, curled up on the couch, clutching her rabbit tightly as she drifted into sleep. I watched her chest rise and fall, the innocence of her dreams contrasting with the war that had just been fought in her name. My heart ached with both relief and sorrow, because even in victory, there was no true peace. Not yet. Later, when the house was quiet and the dishes had been left untouched in the sink, Adam turned to me with an expression I will never forget. His eyes were tired, his body slumped from weeks of tension. But beneath it all, I saw something raw and vulnerable. Hope. He took my hands in his voice trembling as he whispered, "Marry me." The words pierced through the silence, fragile and powerful all at once. My heart clenched, not because I didn't want it, because I did more than I could ever admit, but because I looked across the room at Lily, sleeping soundly, and realized the weight of what that promise would mean. It wouldn't just be about us. It would be about her, about the map she had drawn, about the star she had marked as safe. If I said yes now, if I leapt into that future without pause, I risked building something too fragile for the storms still ahead. So I held his hands tighter, tears filling my eyes, and I whispered, "Not yet. Not until she's ready. Not until she knows that this isn't just another promise adults make and break." His face fell for just a moment, but then he nodded, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. He understood. This wasn't rejection. It was protection. It was love shaped by patience, not urgency. Days turned into weeks. Therapy sessions began, court-mandated and tense, but slowly, in small ways, they offered glimpses of healing. Adam and I learned how to navigate Lily's fears, how to listen without pressing, how to give her control in moments when the world felt too uncertain. Maya attended too, her charm still sharp, her words still cutting, but even she could not fully mask the cracks showing through. The process was grueling, but within it, there were fragile victories. One evening, after a particularly long session, Lily came home with crayons scattered across her lap. She sat at the coffee table, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she sketched lines across a fresh piece of paper. I sat beside her quietly, watching the colors spread into shapes, the arrows stretching across the page. My heart lurched when I realized what she was drawing. A new map. This time there was no winding path from her mother's house, no hurried arrows pointing to escape routes. Instead, there was one house drawn in the center, slightly crooked but solid, and above it, a bright star. She pressed the crayon so hard it nearly tore the paper as she wrote in uneven letters one simple word: home. I couldn't breathe. My throat closed as I watched her hold up the drawing with a shy smile, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief. Adam came over, his hands trembling as he took the picture from her, his lips quivering as he whispered, "Home." He kissed the top of her head, and I felt tears roll down my cheeks as Lily looked at me and whispered softly, "Safe." It wasn't the judge's ruling that defined our family. It wasn't the paperwork, the signatures, or the schedules. It was this crayon star, this child's quiet declaration that we were hers, that we were chosen. I folded my arms around them both, holding them as if the world could never pry us apart. And in that moment, I realized something I had struggled to put into words for so long. Love is not about victory in court. It is about showing up, over and over again, until the fragile trust of a child blooms into certainty. And that was the moment I finally knew what to say to Adam. If Lily's words touched you the way they touched me, tell me in the comments what part of her story stayed with you most. I read every reply, and your thoughts mean more than you know. If you want to walk with me through more stories like this, stories of love, loss, and hope, make sure to subscribe. And if this journey moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that family is more than blood. It's who chooses you.